Canada is quietly making a move that could change the global energy game forever. A massive LNG expansion could push Canada into the world's top energy league, bringing jobs, investment, and global influence. But while Canada stands ready to gain, the US could see its dominance face a serious new challenge. And this may be only the beginning. In May 2026, the Government of Canada, the Government of British Columbia, and LNG Canada signed a formal Enhanced Investment Cooperation Agreement at a ceremony in Vancouver. And the document they signed carries a number that immediately defines its commercial scale. A Phase 2 investment could position Canada as a top 5 global LNG exporting nation. That single sentence, published at the same day the agreement was signed, describes what approval of the LNG Canada Phase 2 expansion would mean for the country's position in the global energy market. A nation that did not export a single molecule of LNG until Phase 1 began operations in summer, 2025 could within a decade rank among the 5 largest LNG exporters on Earth. On May 1st, 2026, LNG Canada's joint venture participants approved hundreds of millions of dollars in incremental funding to help finalize critical work scopes to achieve a potential final investment decision by the end of the year. That May 1st vote by the JVPs, Shell holding 40%, with PetroChina, Diamond LNG Canada, Mitsubishi Corporation, and Korea Gas Corporation holding the remaining 60%, committed real capital to the pre-FID engineering and infrastructure work that must be completed before the final decision can be taken. Subject to appropriate progress, the funds would be deployed in further engineering, potential long lead item placement, progressing agreements with First Nations, finalization of commercial items across pipeline and supply chain, and progressing construction work at LNG Canada's marine offloading terminal. This is not a government announcement of intent. It is a joint venture vote, committing hundreds of millions of private dollars to active work. The May 14th cooperation agreement formalized the 4 mutual objectives that now govern the federal-provincial project relationship for Phase 2. Those objectives are collaborative work with First Nations, building on Canada's investment climate locally, provincially, and nationally, ensuring jobs and training opportunities, and further diversifying export markets and growing the secure supply of responsibly produced Canadian LNG to allied nations at scale at a critical time as Canada looks to build and solidify a stronger international trade network. That 4th objective, diversifying export markets, is the one that defines Phase 2's strategic significance in the current geopolitical context. Canada's LNG is not going to the United States. It is going across the Pacific to Japan, South Korea, China, and Southeast Asia on long-term contracts denominated in the Brent-linked prices those markets pay. Last summer, LNG Canada Phase 1 solidified a new era of Canadian energy leadership by shipping our very first LNG to global customers. Following Phase 2's referral to the Federal Major Projects Office, and together with British Columbia, LNG Canada, and First Nations leaders, we are aiming even higher, and that ambition is delivering. Natural Resources Minister Tim Hodgson stated, "The physical scale of what Phase 2 represents in comparison to Phase 1 explains why the decision carries this much weight for global LNG markets. Phase 1 comprises 2 LNG processing trains at the Kitimat facility, each capable of producing approximately 7 million tons per year, giving Phase 1 a total nameplate capacity of approximately 14 million tons per year. Phase 2 would add 2 identical additional trains, doubling the facility's total capacity to 28 million tons annually. At that scale, Canada's single Kitimat facility would rank among the world's largest LNG export terminals, comparable in capacity to some of the largest facilities in Qatar, Australia, and the United States. The environmental performance projection attached to Phase 2 is specific and documented. Emissions for Phase 2 are projected to be 35% lower than those for the world's best-performing LNG facilities and 60% lower than the global average. That performance gap reflects the specific energy source powering Phase 2, British Columbia's hydroelectric grid, which provides electricity to the liquefaction process at a carbon intensity dramatically lower than the natural gas-fired generation that powers competing LNG facilities in Qatar, Australia, and the American Gulf Coast. For European buyers operating under the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and Asian buyers increasingly subject to domestic carbon pricing frameworks, the emissions profile of Phase 2's LNG becomes a commercial differentiator alongside its pricing. The Coastal GasLink pipeline that feeds Phase 1's gas supply from Montney production in northeastern British Columbia extends to Phase 2 through TC Energy's commercial framework. TC Energy signed new deals in March 2026 for Coastal GasLink expansion capacity, adding firm transportation agreements that would support additional gas volumes required for Phase 2 liquefaction trains. Those expansion agreements lock in the upstream supply pipeline capacity before the final investment decision is taken, removing a key commercial risk from the decision itself by confirming that the gas supply infrastructure will be available when the new trains begin operations. Shell's April 27th, 2026 acquisition of ARC Resources for USD $16.4 billion added approximately 2 billion barrels of proved and probable oil equivalent reserves and 370,000 barrels per day of production, overwhelmingly from Montney natural gas. ARC's Montney gas production is specifically identified in Shell's own acquisition announcement as supporting growth in LNG Canada. A Shell that now owns ARC's Montney position, alongside its 40% stake in LNG Canada, controls the upstream feedstock and the downstream liquefaction capacity within a single corporate structure. That integration eliminates the multi-party negotiation required to align gas supply volumes with LNG offtake commitments, exactly the kind of commercial alignment that makes a Phase 2 final investment decision commercially straightforward rather than contractually complex. Canada Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson confirmed in May 2026 that LNG Canada would make its Phase 2 final investment decision before the end of 2026. The cooperation agreement signed May 14th, the JVP funding vote of May 1st, the TC Energy Coastal GasLink expansion agreements of March 2026, Shell's ARC acquisition of April 27th, and Phase 1's April record of 1 million metric tons exported to Asia. These 5 developments in a 10-week window describe a project that is not building toward a decision. It is already executing the pre-decision work, with capital committed, partnerships formalized, and supply chains under contract. Now is the moment for purposeful collaboration to satisfy all the requirements necessary for a positive FID and seize a generational opportunity that could materially increase the scale of reliable, responsibly produced, made in BC LNG for decades to come, stated Chris Cooper, President and CEO of LNG Canada. The comparison to American Gulf Coast LNG is the commercial context that Canadian officials have been careful not to overstate, but that the project's structure makes implicit. U.S. LNG facilities ship through the Gulf of Mexico and across either the Atlantic to Europe or the Pacific via the Panama Canal to Asia. LNG Canada ships directly across the North Pacific from Kitimat, the shortest oceanic route between North America and Northeast Asian LNG buyers.